Hi, welcome to Mindset Makeover, overcoming self-sabotage and embracing your extraordinary. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking out the time. And for the next 30, 45 minutes or so, I really encourage you to put your phones on silence and give me your full attention so that you can actually walk away with the full value of this webinar. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Barbara Schwark. I am the CEO of Clear Intentions International. I've been coaching, executive coaching, life coaching, business coaching for 25 years. And my specialty is really to help you respond differently to circumstance. And what I mean by that is helping you to rewrite your limiting beliefs that run you and that really push you around. And I hope that this webinar will give you some insight on how to do that so that you can really create the life that you always dreamt of having. And that could be that you start a business, that could be that you turn your business around, that could be that you start a family. It doesn't really matter what the subject matter is. All that matters is that you fulfill your dream, your goals, your objectives based on who you are and how you want to show up in the world. So let's get started. And a lot of what's going to be all about today is really an opportunity for you to look at this and subject matter, goals, and shifting your mindset in a different way. And I'm sure that you've heard some of this, and sometimes it takes 5 times, 7 times, 10 times, 20 times before we can actually listen to the information and do something with it. I remember attending a presentation, 20 years ago by the CEO of a prominent women's network, television network. And she said it takes at least 7 times for people to hear the word free from them to actually register. So now we're talking about goals, we're talking about mindset and negative beliefs and things that are a little uncomfortable for us. And I encourage you just be open. So what I wrote in my intro is all about us being very familiar with this feeling that we're so close to achieving something and we can touch it. We're so close. And then we end up sabotaging ourselves again and again and again. And we make promises to ourselves and then we don't keep them and we feel bad about ourselves. And then we think we can get up again. And for some of us, there are some areas in our lives where we've made so many promises that the moment that you think about it, you're even worse off than you were before because you said to yourself, I am not going to drink coffee, or I'm not going to eat gluten. One of my things, coffee and gluten, or I'm going to get up early, and then I don't do it. And I feel worse afterwards because I am once again reminded that I'm not able to fulfill on something that I know is good for us. And of course, it brings up the question of why don't we do the things that are good for us? We know it's good for us to get up, maybe exercise. It's good for us to get more sleep. It's maybe good for us to avoid certain people in our lives, but we do it. And it doesn't matter how much we reason about it. We know it's not good and we do it anyway. And for those of you who have been wondering why that is, I can tell you that the secret to being successful or being able to follow through with your word can be found in the unconscious, subconscious, and unconscious part of our mind, of our brain. And that's where we're going to go today. I lecture about this a lot, neuroscience, because it's a form of neuroscience and taking a look at how we function so that we can bring more compassion to ourselves and understand ourselves better, what it is all about. And then you can see if you want to make a difference and how you want to go about making a difference. So those beliefs that run us, that we have created at some point in our lives, are just what I would call outdated software. And they were created at some point And they were probably created for a very good reason, because you needed that software to survive. But now they're outdated and they're still running you, and you don't know how to get rid of it. And it's still, with you, and it's really holding you back. So for example, it could be that you were 3 years old and you decided to be super creative, and you took out the crayons and you drew all over the walls in the dining room. And your mom came home and she was tired and she was exhausted and she was, cranky. And her response was not, "Wow, honey, look at what you did." Her response was a negative one. And maybe she yelled at you. Maybe, I'm old enough to say every once in a while, my parents, whacked me on the behind. That was what you received. And you created a belief based on that. And you don't even know that you created that belief, that is not a good idea. And so rather than feeling good about creativity, somehow inside of you, there's a negative belief. Now you're in your 40s and your 50s and your 60s, and your supervisor or at work, they're telling you you're not living up to your true potential. We can see, we can feel, we can sense that there's more creativity inside of you. And we want you to be that creative person, but you're somehow unable to do it because you have a limiting belief inside yourself that is really holding you back from being creative. Another example would be you're a teenager and you were super athletic when you were a teenager. And, it was rough because you had to be tough, you had to be strong, and crying wasn't allowed. You couldn't be a baby. And here you are, a manager now, and you have maybe 2,000, 3,000 people under you. And you just have a hard time when people are not keeping their word, or when they say that they can't do it, or they come up with excuses and you're aggressive about it, and you really get triggered. And you don't even know that is the connection, that when you were a teenager, you created that belief for yourself that it wasn't okay for you to be weak. So those are some of the examples that we have. And it's super important that we recognize those and that we make those connections, because when we make those connections with ourselves and with the circumstances that we're living in, then we can actually start to be curious about it and set ourselves free. And I think that's one of the gifts that we can give to ourselves. So we all have these experiences. Some of them happened to us when we were quite young and we really don't remember them, but our body somehow does. And some of them were quite traumatic, and we're not here to talk about trauma. That is for you to decide. And what we can do about it is that we can actually rewire ourselves, and that we make the connection between what is going on and what is the body saying, what is the automatic behavior telling us, and then rewrite that history or rewrite the response, so that when we are moving ourselves forward, because every time that you have a goal, inevitably what you're asking yourself to do is to step outside the comfort zone. You're challenging yourself. It's not so easy to step outside the comfort zone. Maybe for some who are actually looking for thrills because that's how they experience themselves. But for most of us, we like to be comfortable. We like to, have it easy going. And then when there's this goal, making more money, finding love, getting pregnant, moving to a different country, it's a challenge. So there's a couple of things that we're going to do today. We're going to look at the brain. We're going to look at why we hit the self-sabotage button and what the brain has to do with that. We're going to look at the reason that our past development work, the past things that you've been doing, in some cases actually it has worked, but where it hasn't worked and what you can do in order to move it forward. And we're going to look at a method that I use called neuroemotional coaching that's backed by neuroscience, and see how I actually assist my clients to move forward. And along the way, I'm going to give you a lot of tips that you can practice, that you can try out, that you can maybe dust off again because you've been doing it for a while, and then see how they work. And one of the things that I want to get back to is what all these things have in common, these experiences that we have, is that they all have some form of negative belief that are connecting those things. And that's usually a version of, I'm not good enough, it's never going to work, no matter how hard I try, I can't do it, or if I only could, or da 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 da. So it doesn't matter whether you're CEO, whether you're a manager, whether you're a teenager, whether you are looking to start a family. If you're a human being, on some level, at some time, you have a limiting belief that is holding you back. And some of us have a lot of it, and some of us have a few of it. So that's what we're going to look at today. So I'm going to talk about the brain, and in order to do it, I am going to bring up the slides about the brain. Here we go. So I say the brain is the culprit, but of course the brain is also a wonderful tool that we have. And you can see I have somebody in the middle and a little bit of a picture about what the brain looks like, and then I have these 3 different parts. And I'd like to talk about the brain and do a little brain surgery, because I think it really helps us to understand. And what I said earlier, I really mean it. I think when there's a level of understanding, it's easier for us to bring compassion to ourselves, because oftentimes what also keeps us stuck in those paradigms and in those negative beliefs is that we judge ourselves. It's not good enough. We don't say we judge ourselves. We say we're annoyed, or I'm frustrated. But really what we're saying is like, I'm frustrated with myself because I judge myself. So look at the brain. I'm going to do this brain surgery. Won't hurt. And I'm going to get deeper into the 3 parts of the brain. Now, as we all know, the brain controls everything about us. Why you're here, why I put the shirt on, why I chose those colors for my slides, my muscle movement, my memory, the things that I know about, my breathing, which is, obviously going on in a very uncontrolled kind of automatic fashion. Everything is controlled or determined or managed by our brain. So the first part of the brain that we have is called the neocortex. The neocortex is the part of our brain that's conscious. That means we are actually aware of it. I am aware of my thoughts. So some of you might say, I'm not aware of my thoughts coming in and my thoughts coming out, but we are aware of our thoughts. And maybe you want to say, I can't control them, but you can certainly shift them. I can think about my mother and I can think about her for a period of time. And then I can go back and think about something else where I can shift my thoughts. It's the only part of the brain that's conscious. And that neocortex is the part that biochemically creates thinking, analysis, language, anything that has to do with those areas. And we need language in order to move ourselves forward, because we as human beings do it in pictures with words. So when I think about a tree, there's language that goes along with it. Okay. Or when I think about, I want to make more money. Okay. I might even see money. I might see a currency, or I might see, a yacht, or I might see, something that represents that. Or if I wanted to say I'm healthy, maybe I see myself jogging, or I see myself eating healthy foods, or I see myself feeling good. There's always words and language that goes along with that. So neocortex, conscious part of the brain, I'm aware of it. That part of the brain, tops, makes for 10% of our total brain. We in the Western world especially, but I think, maybe it's actually fair to say, not just the Western world, think that there is something called mind over matter, mind over the body. And it might work for a moment. And for some of you, you might actually be so lucky that you can do it. But generally speaking, it's impossible, because that other 90% has so much more weight. It's so much more powerful that it will always over trump that 10%. Okay. A mother that is afraid and has rational thoughts about doing something that will harm her life will have the instinct to save her child, because her fight, flight, or freeze, the other part of the brain will take over and automatically change her thinking or over trump it, and then do something, that will actually cause her to be able to save the child. The next part of the brain is called the limbic, and you see that on the right. You see, somebody's crying, and that's a representation of the emotionality of that part of the brain. The limbic is all about the emotion. It is the part where the emotions are being produced. Also, it's biochemically, because everything that happens in the brain is biochemical. There's neuropeptides, and there's neurons, and there's neuroplasticity, and then there fires the neurons on the receptor cells. It's all a biochemical chain reaction. And that part of the brain is also responsible for the temperature. So you will notice sometimes that you have a big shift in temperature in your body when there's intense emotionality. You're angry, you feel cold, you're excited, you feel hot. For us women who are dealing with menopause or have dealt with menopause, you will notice that sometimes that when there's something emotional going on, that you actually get a hot flash. So not that I can actually explain very well that connection, but what I want to say with that is that there's emotionality. I'm excited and something is going on. And then the body will respond with a shift in temperature. That part of the brain is already below the conscious. We call it subconscious in English, which is a great word because it's not deep, 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 deep down, but it's somewhere sort of in between the conscious and the unconscious. Now we'll make a distinction between the unconscious and the subconscious. The next part of the brain is the reptilian brain. You see it in the left-hand corner. And that part of the brain is what we call the fight, flight, or freeze, or please. Fawn. And that is our survival. And that part of the brain is very, very strong. It's very important because our response when we are in danger is either to run, to play dead, to fight, or what has been determined lately that pleasing other people because we don't want to be abandoned, because we don't want to die alone in the cave, is also a survival response. So when we're in a survival state, and these days we're more in a survival state than ever, because I live in Israel, so I'm certainly in a survival state. And elections are going on in the United States, so a lot of people are in a survival state. We have a war going on in Europe. The economy is not doing so well in Europe and the world in general. So people are worried about their future. They're not sure that it's all going to work out for them. So the fight, flight, or freeze or fawn is really active. So depending on the culture that you live in, it's going to show up differently. In Israel, I want to say there's a lot of aggression that I experience, especially on the road, the way that people communicate, and the lack of sort of empathy and niceness is really present. Because people are worried, and of course there's serious trauma that people experience and on various levels. So the reptilian brain and the limbic brain make up for about 88, 90, some people say even 95% of our brain. So just take that into consideration, that if 95% of our brain is unconscious and subconscious, how strong is our willpower? The willpower that creates the part of our brain that creates the goals. Here in this next slide, I have sort of put this in the levels of awareness. And so you can see we have the conscious level, the subconscious level, and the unconscious level. And I love this image of an iceberg, that what we see up top is really the conscious level, our neocortex. And then what we have underneath here, the limbic and the reptilian, and the fight, flight, freeze is the part that really rules us. The way that you can often or easily distinguish between those two levels is that you can say, well, the subconscious is like a beach ball. My emotions, I push down on them, especially the bad ones. But if I let go of the pressure that I put on the ball and it bumps back up, then I can actually experience it. So if I don't sex it away or drug it away or watch it away or, Netflix it away or work it away, then I am more present to what it is that I'm actually experiencing there emotionally. And then we have the unconscious level, which is deep down. I want to say a few more things about the brain because I think it's helpful and it really supports that notion of compassion. So many of you will maybe remember Pavlov, the guy that conditioned the dogs, and he conditioned the dogs to salivate. And he did it by creating a response, and then he connected the two things together. And then eventually he would ring the bell, and the dogs, without even having the food, they would start to salivate. The part that they don't tell you is that eventually that conditioned response went away in the healthy dogs. And they were dogs, that were abused, and those dogs couldn't stop with the conditioned response. So here we are back to what I said I didn't want to talk so much about, which is trauma, and negative experiences that we had. How healthy are we as human beings? And you will see that in many, many cases, the undealt with trauma, and not that I always say that you have to be able to resolve it completely, really can cause havoc in your ability to move yourself forward. Another point that's really important when we talk about the limbic is Candace Pert, who wrote a book called The Molecule of Emotion, and she really was able to determine that this limbic system, this emotionality that we experience in our body, it's not just going on in our heart. We like to have maybe my hand on my heart or maybe on my stomach, but it goes on everywhere, because what's happening is that emotions are neuropeptides attaching to receptors and then creating an electrical charge on the neuron. So you can see that that can happen in your toe. So you can have an emotional experience in your toe. A couple more things. We have Randy Flanagan from Canada, and he determined that we're really slow. And so not only do we have this 90% that is our unconscious and subconscious, the sort of like bag that we carry around our neck, or this bag that we carry around on our back, but we're slow. We're very slow. We're not necessarily fast to change things. And it might actually have to do something with the negative responses that we have and that we carry around in ourselves. Last but not least, we have these three elements of the brain. What's happening to me, my perception, what happened in the past, my memory, what are the comparable situations that I've experienced, and then we generate actions in the present based on that stored memory. So let's say I have to go through a new door. I've never been through this door. Go in my memory bank. Was it okay? Yes, it was okay. I go and everything's fine. Let's say I am stepping outside my comfort zone. And the last time I stepped outside my comfort zone, maybe I don't even remember it consciously, but I remember it unconsciously. It wasn't a good experience because my mother yelled at me when I drew with the crayons on the wall. So now my boss is asking me to be more creative. Hey, Barbara, come up with a better sketch. Hey, Barbara, have better ideas. And I can't do it because my memory is telling me that I had a bad experience. Not just bad, it was maybe even slightly traumatic, okay? So I'm not going to do it, or it's going to be very difficult for me to do. And I don't even remember that because that memory is stored very, very, very deep somewhere in my body because I don't actually want to remember it. And so for those of you who are wondering why you are frozen sometimes and you can't move yourself forward, that is why. There's something that happened to you, some interpretation that is sitting somewhere on the cellular level, and you haven't been able to connect with that and rewrite it or tell itself a different story. Okay, so that is my presentation on the brain. So what can we do? Okay, so I gave you just a lot of information on the brain, and you might want to pause and make a note to yourself and say, hey, you know what? I might want to watch this section again and again and again so that I can really fully understand it and then apply it to my day-to-day or my life or my goal. And perhaps you will better understand of why there are things that you can actually easily accomplish, like brushing your teeth, or why there are things that are very difficult for you to accomplish because there's something going on, like an airplane or something is actually in the way. So if my theory is correct, then the solution would be to look and see what's going on in your subconscious and your unconscious. And especially, I'm going to say, in your unconscious. So how can we get to that unconscious? And I'm going to talk about some things that are well known. And maybe this time, because I'm talking about them in a different context, it actually will make more sense to you. So the first thing that we can do is breathe. Breathing will calm down your central nervous system, your parasympathetic, and it will actually calm down your fight, flight, or freeze or fawn. When our reptilian brain, our survival, is calm, we are more able to access our emotions. And emotions are powerful information centers. We want to know what the emotions are saying so that we can actually do something about it or do something with them. So breathing is extremely important. There's a lot of things written about breathing. There's a book that I really, really recommend to just about all of my clients. It's called Breath. And now I can't think of the author, Nestor, I want to say. It's about the history of breathing, and it's written by a journalist who was also a diver, James Nestor. There we go. And it's very interesting because there's some science to it and there's some exercises, and I think it's a must because it will change the way you breathe for sure, but it also, if you do it, will give you some information of why that is so important. So breathing, there's conscious breathing, and the breath work is more and more accessible and available. And one of the things that the book says, for instance, is that if we can get ourselves from 20 times a minute breathing in and out to about 5 times to breathe in and out, then we're at a good pace. And most of the Eastern worlds, when they meditate, or when they do their prayer, they're actually in a 5 times per minute rhythm. So that means you breathe in to a pace of 5.5 seconds, and you breathe out to a pace of 5.5 seconds. So you might want to just attempt that, for a couple minutes every day, and just see what happens. So breathing. The second would be meditating, because meditating is also something that really, really helps your reptilian brain to calm down. Why? Because when you shut down the phone, shut down the TV, shut down all the external sort of distractions, your brain starts to focus, your brain starts to calm down. And maybe you have this experience, and sometimes I have that when I sit down, where it's like, it's a little bit static. But eventually, when you continue, you do the breathing, the body will just sort of get into this particular gear, and you will be calmer, and you will be able to access your emotions in a different way. And breathing and meditating and journaling is sort of like the third thing, are important tools to actually see what are you really feeling. And most of us, we are so busy to push everything away that because we don't feel good, so we do everything that we can not to feel it. Once you're actually able to feel more of what you're feeling, then there's a different set of exercises that you want to do, such as forgiveness, gratitude, championing yourself, acknowledging yourself, and so that you can actually direct your emotions. And maybe one of the most important exercise is feeling your feelings. And Tony Robbins calls that the 90-second rules. And in my coaching school, the Coaches Training Institute, we say, coaching, going up and down the tube. And it's basically allowing yourself to fully feel your emotions, to have a temper tantrum in a contained way, meaning you give yourself a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes. Years ago, I remember doing this with a group of teachers, and for 10 minutes or so, they were all allowed to complain and bitch and whine and moan and groan. And when I started the exercise with them, they were doing it a little bit, and then I was like, "No, come on, really get into it." And so all of a sudden, the room got really loud, and everybody was really, really doing it, and they got some relief afterwards, because when we really allow ourselves to do it, then we turn back around. And maybe we need to do it every day, because we're living in a situation that's so frustrating, and we're so out of control that, I'm being triggered all the time. So then I do it every day, because it helps me to feel better about myself and the circumstances that I live in. So that might be something that you do first. Another tool that I recommend to my clients is called free-form writing, sitting down with a piece of paper and just writing all your emotions and thoughts on a piece of paper without reading them and committing to destroying them, preferably burning them before you even start. So I will sit for a half hour and I write all the things that come into my thoughts, my feelings, put it on a piece of paper, I dump it on there, I vomit it on there. I just express myself deeply with all the frustrations, all that I have, and then I destroy it and I let it go. And again, it might be one time that I do it, I write a letter and I'm good, but it may be something that I need to do repetitively because of the situation that I'm in and the frustrations that I'm experiencing. And then, like I mentioned before, there's gratitude, there's forgiveness. A lot of us, we judge ourselves very, very harshly. The sentence that I use when I do forgiveness is from the University of Santa Monica. I forgive myself for judging myself, and then filling in the blank, or I forgive myself for judging so-and-so or the circumstance, and I go as deep as I can. And when I did it for the first time, I think it was 1994, 30 years ago, I thought it was like woo-woo, weird. I couldn't relate to it because I was so far removed from being able to forgive myself that I just went through the emotions. If you're in that space, that is okay. If it's an intellectual exercise, all right. Eventually, you will be able to relate to it and it will do its thing, because when we hold the judgments inside, our physiology actually changes. And there's lots of research that has been written about that. Let's see what else I want to say. I think I said everything. There's, of course, visualizing. And so sometimes I am just so stuck. And I think, my last month I was really stuck. And then I did a lot of these tools and then I felt like I could move on. I was frustrated about living in Israel. And I was frustrated about a few things that I was experiencing personally. And I would just pray to be able to let go. I'm like, please, I just want to let go. And I would do the exercises. And eventually I just envisioned myself being able to have it lift from me and to be free of it. And then, as I was taking time for myself, I got some different ideas on how I could behave. And like it is with every goal, when we step outside our comfort zone, I felt a little afraid and I would put my toe in the water. And then, I'm on my way before I know it. And I feel differently and my universe looks differently because I'm responding and relating to what's going on outside of me in a different way. So that's a lot of what you can do to deal with your emotions. Of course, sleeping, drinking water, diet, all those things are good for your reptilian brain. And I did my dissertation on sleep. Basically, it turned out that sleep's the most important thing that we can do in order to feel good about ourselves, to feel comfortable and connected with ourselves. So all those things will make a huge difference to have a regular schedule. And I know it's difficult because it's one of the things I struggle with. So I highly, highly, highly recommend it. I have about 10 minutes. So I'm going to do a fast switch. And I want to talk for 10 minutes about what I do. So when people came to me 25 years ago, they wanted big change fast, including myself. And to make a long story short, I looked around and I got exposed to a bunch of different techniques and tools, alternative, also practiced by a PhD psychologist. So, I had some validity to it. And I came across something called muscle testing. And I was a big skeptic initially. I couldn't understand it and I couldn't relate to it. And I really, honestly, I thought it was weird. So muscle testing is a 2,000-year technique, comes to us from China, actually. And it's based on the premise that when we think about something and we say something, that a muscle in our body will be stronger. And the opposite, if we think about something that's not good for us, that the muscle will be weaker. And it's a cooperative test. It's like a oil gauge, and I use it in order to find out that when you think about something, or you have a assertion about something, like I want to, or I can, and I'm okay with, or I look at something, that all of your systems, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, is testing strong. And when I find that it's not testing strong, I know that there's a belief or an experience or, a combination of things that are that are vetting against it or pushing against it. So muscle testing is kind of my go-to tool. And then I have a 15-step method. I call all of this neuroemotional coaching. And with the 15 steps, we go down and we look to see how your current reality is connected to your past reality. And if we can pinpoint an event when your body decided to interpret something in a limiting way. And once we connect those events and we do what I call like a clearing or a guided imagery kind of exercise, the body all of a sudden recognizes, this is in the past. This has nothing to do with today. I can let it go because of the connection. And through this clearing exercise and the connection of those two, and oftentimes, because this whole muscle testing really goes beyond language. I don't want to use language. I don't want to use your neocortex, the smart part of the brain. The opposite. I want to use something else. We're able to release big things fast and in a sort of amazing, miraculous way. So neuroemotional coaching, the whole purpose is to change your response to circumstance. And what I mean by that is that if you have a goal and you're pushing along and you're thinking like, I've been thinking about moving to another country for the last 10 years and I just don't know why I can't do it, or I'm not clear about my future, or I want to get a divorce, or I want to make more money, or I want to start a company, that when we use neuroemotional coaching and we muscle test, we can actually see very precisely how much you believe in that and how much your past and the negative belief that you've created, that are still hanging around you, are still holding you back. And it's one of the things I love to do. I feel like it's one of the things I was put on the planet to do. And, I work with Fortune 500 companies and entrepreneurs and people from all over the world, and I do this technique. Yesterday, I was in Europe, and I was in the Middle East, and I was in the Far East, and I was in Israel, and I was all over. I traveled all over, and it's really my great pleasure to be able to work with people in this way. So what else do I want to say about it? I'm going to give you some examples so that you can maybe get a better understanding of how that works. A good example would be, let's say, I'll give you a personal example. So when I started out doing this work, and in full disclosure, I had a very traumatic childhood and I struggled a lot. I didn't know who I was, what I wanted to be, if I could ever support myself. I didn't think I was smart enough. I barely graduated from high school, barely. I was just very triggered all the time, and I had a hard time connecting with people, couldn't express myself, just totally different, I hope, no, I know, of where I am today. And early on, we were working on abandonment. And I can't remember what the exact sentence was, but my whole childhood, I always, even in my early adulthood, I felt like people didn't want me and I didn't belong. And I even had birthday parties where nobody showed up, or people were late. And we came to abandonment because one of the things that we do in the technique is we look at the emotions that show up and that the body will reveal through the muscle testing. Abandonment showed up. And then we always look to see, when was the most original time that there was abandonment. And my birth showed up. And I knew that my mother almost passed away when I was born, but I didn't know the whole story. So, and the guy said to me, my psychologist that I was working with said 8 hours, ask about 8 hours. And then I called my mother and she told me that it took about 8 hours for us to be united. And she was, she had lost too much blood. They couldn't stop the bleeding. And in those 8 hours, my brain had created that, of course, it doesn't work that intellectually. Like I had created this abandonment complex, but I felt abandoned. Nobody wanted me. Here I was in this world. I came out and, of course, there were people around me, but not the person that I wanted to be with, that I had been connected with for the last 9 months. And it wasn't that there was something that she could have done about it. It was just, something that happened. And afterwards, it changed. Everything changed. And granted, I did a lot of work already before that and after that. But I can honestly say that I never felt so abandoned again, ever. Like this fundamental sense of abandonment really lifted. And I was able to do more things because, I started a company, or actually a few companies. And when you start a company, you get abandoned a lot. And so that's a personal example. And thank you for letting me share that with you. Other examples are, and I have many, 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 are an entrepreneur that I work with who had a hard time charging people. And it went back to the fact that his dad had gone bankrupt, and he watched the whole thing and he didn't make that connection. So when he made the connection, he was able to sort of put it in perspective and was able to go out and charge. And I think within, 2 or 3 months, the guy was able to, to triple his salary and really was able to charge what he wanted to charge. And another example would be a woman that came to me that wanted to lose weight. And it turned out that the connection that she made, that she had forgotten, is that when she had surgery, when she was a little girl, one of the ways that they comforted her was they brought her cupcakes. And now she was in her 40s or 50s, and she had a hard time comforting herself. So examples go on and on. I've worked with public speakers. I've worked with big CEOs. And because we're all human beings, and because we all have the same functionality and structure of the brain, it doesn't really matter. So whether you want to be a big CEO, whether you want to make millions, whether you want to change the world, whether you want to bring peace in the Middle East, as long as our reptilian, limbic, and neocortex are not in alignment with one another, each other, it's going to be a really, 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 really hard time. And when you, for instance, look at the Middle East, you can see how the reptilian is at work and how the neocortex, even though everything sounds so intellectual, is not really functioning, or functioning is maybe not the right word. It's not really at play. That most of what's going on is all reptilian. Survival, survival, survival. I'm afraid, so I'm either going to run away, or so I'm going to attack. And I'm not really talking about rightfully so or not rightfully so. It just, it's just what's going on. So if you want to elevate yourself, if you have something that you haven't been able to do on your own, or you want to get there faster, or you're confused, I really invite you to consider setting up an intro session with me. And for those of you who are into doing that, if you sign up for a coaching packet with me and you told me that you watched my video today, I will give you a 10% off. That's just my gift to you for taking the time to be here. And for those of you who are just curious and you want to stay in touch with me, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I have a podcast that I started about a month and a half ago. Next Monday, we have another episode that comes out. You can be on Instagram with me, on Facebook. You can sign up for my newsletter. There's all these ways to stay in touch. And I encourage you to do so, because my whole purpose for being in business is to make the world a better place. And I believe the way to do it is by healing ourselves and making ourselves better people. Because when we come from a better place, when we come from a place of loving, everything will be better. So with that, my final words are, no matter what goes on, if you can love yourself, if you can bring loving to yourself, no matter how you show up, regardless of whether you're depressed on the couch or whether you are just, you just did, as we would say here in Israel, a big fadicha, a big mistake, bring the loving to it. The way that you would love a baby who just pooped in the diapers. If you can just bring that loving to yourself, you have made progress. With that, I thank you. I sign off. Look me up on clearintentions.net. Have a great day.